Relating to a label can definitely be helpful for people. It can help them feel like they're not alone, make them feel understood, normalize what they're going through, help them find a community of like-minded people who are sort of going through the same thing, help you gain the knowledge to spread awareness or psychoeducation to other people, help them get the appropriate treatment for their particular diagnosis. There are definitely benefits to having a label and being able to put a name to it. But there's this trend that I've been noticing on social media and in real life sometimes, where people sort of let their illness define their whole personality. And today I'll be talking about why I think that can be incredibly harmful. Hi guys, welcome back. I'm Anna, a psychologist in training, a clinical psychology doctoral intern. Today I'll be talking about why I think it can be harmful to let your mental health diagnosis sort of absorb your whole personality and become a part of your identity. The first thing we have to talk about is that what we believe becomes our reality. The thoughts we have about ourselves are very much self-fulfilling prophecies. For example, if I believe that I'm socially awkward, the next time I go interact with a group of people, I'm going to have that playing in my head in my own internal monologue. And I'm going to keep telling myself, you're so awkward, you're so shy, you can't interact with people, until I actually trip myself up and I do behave awkwardly. Versus if I tell myself, I'm not socially awkward, sometimes I'm shy in certain situations, sometimes I might make a mistake, that's very human, this is just a normal human experience. Sometimes awkwardness is going to come up, but I'm not a socially awkward person per se. And if I think about things that way, I might actually put myself out there, be more comfortable around people, make friends more easily, laugh it off when I do behave in awkward ways, remind myself that other people are doing the same thing. The truth is that everything is context dependent. Personality can roughly be defined as what we do across contexts, but there's still a great amount of variation within those contexts. So for example, I'm not a particularly assertive person. I don't see myself very high on the assertiveness scale. But when I'm with family, like people in my close circle that I feel very comfortable with, I can be very direct. I have no problem asking for what I need. It's more so with strangers that I struggle to set boundaries. So in this situation, would I benefit more from telling myself I'm such a passive person, or I'm assertive in some situations and less assertive in X, Y, and Z situations? Probably the latter. This is not in any way you lying to yourself. It's actually being more realistic about the way that your behavior varies from context to context. What we believe becomes our reality, and then our reality we also try to make other people's reality by behaving as if our reality is the universal truth. It's incredibly important to deconstruct negative core beliefs that we have about ourselves. That includes associating our identity with a specific mental health diagnosis. And pathology, by definition, is often harmful to ourselves. It often causes us distress or impairs our functioning. And so to so heavily intertwine your identity with a mental disorder, which is a pathology, that can mean that you are identifying directly with something that causes you harm. That doesn't mean that we need to view something as bad or evil or morally wrong if it's associated with a diagnosis. Something pathological, like I said, might cause us harm. It might interfere with our ability to function, but it's nothing to be ashamed of and it's nothing to hide. It's not something that you need to associate with your identity either. Because again, if you're saying my identity is this thing that causes me distress and impairs my functioning in these specific areas, you're setting yourself up for failure. Something else to keep in mind is that over-identifying with a diagnosis or with a disorder can lead to excusing harmful behavior because you may have divorced yourself from responsibility for your own actions. Something that I unfortunately have seen in a lot of different contexts is when someone absorbs a diagnosis into their identity, like, I have this disorder, I have this personality disorder, I have depression, whatever it is. They tend to see it as a very fixed, immutable, unchangeable thing about themselves. And because they see things in this way, they also see any attempt at changing that as futile. And unfortunately, that does in some cases lead to people excusing their behavior because well, I can't control it, so you just have to accept me the way that I am. This can be problematic for the people around you because in a lot of cases, mental health diagnoses are not just hard on the person experiencing it, although certainly that's the case, it can also be hard on the people around them. For example, depression can make it difficult to show up for others. Anxiety may make you avoid people that you care about. Eating disorders can really scare the people around you about your life. ADHD can mess with other people's time management planning. Mania can definitely cause distress to people around you. Trauma can give you trust issues. Personality disorders can result in emotional issues for other people as well. The list goes on. And I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty for these disorders, not at all. I'm saying that the worst thing you can do to a person if you have a mental health disorder is to simply say, this is just how I am, you kind of have to deal with it. If you instead acknowledge that there are certain ways in which your illness may hurt the people around you, but you take responsibility when that happens and you make corrections, that's much more compassionate to the people around you than simply saying, I don't know what to do, you just gotta handle it. And even if you're not using a diagnosis to justify your behavior, even if you're actually trying very, very hard to resist your illness, to work on treating it, over-identifying with your illness can mean that you're actually spending a lot of energy on it. Paradoxically, the harder you try to resist something, the more energy you're exerting on it. For example, if I'm trying to keep a car from falling off a cliff and I'm standing there in between the car and the cliff, pushing as hard as I can, pushing and resisting, I am devoting an incredible amount of energy on the car. And while I'm doing that, I also can't be scouring my environment for other solutions because I'm so busy trying to keep this car from falling off the cliff. Similarly, if someone is saying, I have depression, I'm trying really hard to work on it, it's really difficult, but I'm trying to resist this, it's just, so integral to who I am as a person and it's really hard. They are trying to work on it, which is wonderful and commendable, but it might still be feeding the depression energy and attention. Whereas simply focusing on solving smaller problems, not the overall depression, but say the low energy, the fatigue, the low mood, the difficulties concentrating, focusing on those specific things may feel more manageable than if you simply say, I have this whole thing called depression and it's so hard to deal with. Simply working on solving specific behaviors without attributing those behaviors to an all-consuming diagnosis might make it easier for you to actually get rid of that diagnosis. So I'm not suggesting you just ignore the problem, but rather focus your attention and energy on the solutions to very specific problems rather than the label itself. A lot of these over-identified TikToks that I see, certainly not all, but many of them are not very solution-focused, but rather problem-focused. It's rarer to see a diagnosis that says, here's what I've done to improve my diagnosis, and much more common, I would say, to see when you have X diagnosis and all these terrible things happen to you. And again, I understand that part of this is just that people need to understand others are going through this and to have it normalized. But past a certain point, I do think it can do more harm than good. So what is a healthier alternative? Think about the diagnosis as just a label. Labels are incredibly arbitrary, and I promise even a lot of therapists don't put that much stock in them. Labels will not change your experience, your specific situation, your specific symptoms. They don't validate or invalidate your experience. They don't change who you are. Like I said, the only things that labels can be helpful for is to get healthcare covered by your insurance, get you the type of healthcare that you need, and to help you find a community of people who have similar struggles. Labels ultimately do not have any effect on your day-to-day life. If you feel depressed, having a professional tell you you have clinical major depressive disorder is not going to change your symptoms. Your distress is valid regardless of whether you have an arbitrary diagnosis or not. So in fact, I would encourage you to not even worry about the diagnosis. Let the professional deal with the diagnosis. If the professional thinks it's a diagnosis that's important for you to understand, such as I would say like obsessive compulsive disorder is important, personality disorders can be important, ADHD can be important only because there's so much misinformation out there. Put that on them. Let them see if it's really important for you to understand the specific symptoms of this clinical label. I've been in therapy, I've kind of moved around over the years, so I've had many different therapists, and not once have I asked for my diagnosis because it doesn't change anything. And to be honest, I am a therapist myself, so I already know what diagnoses I would or wouldn't fit. Diagnoses are largely for insurance and treatment planning, but let your therapist focus on that. All you need to worry about is setting goals and taking action towards those goals. And if you do talk about your diagnosis, make a point of putting some distance in between the illness and yourself. It can be even minor things like the way you talk about it. Instead of saying, oh, I'm a very impulsive person because I have BPD, you can say, I was feeling impulsive on Saturday. Don't think of yourself as driven by the disorder or the disorder as defined by your specific symptoms, because there's a lot of variation within diagnoses in terms of how it can show up for different people. And get more specific. Instead of, my panic disorder was flaring up, I felt my hands go clammy, and I felt some head rush. Get really nitty-gritty, solve very specific problems. Yeah, that's that for today. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll see you soon.